So let's talk about a couple of the other types of grouping. So every device in OmniCenter can be assigned to one category and one site, but as many strategic groups as you want. And categories are really typically used for types of devices, and it's really kind of a reporting construct to allow you to do remote routers or all routers, for example, or core switches versus access switches versus all switches. Sites, on the other hand, have a little bit more specific information associated with them. So for example, here I can see I've got a specific template that's associated with a particular site. But I can also go in here to the site and actually set things like the address. And that's useful because the geographic mapping functions all use this address to geocode the sites onto the map and automatically plot their latitude and longitude. If for some reason that doesn't work for me because my location is obscure or because I don't have any outbound access for my OmniCenter and it can't do the lookup that it needs to do that geocoding, I can override that geocoding manually and set exactly where I want that to be. I can also have it set to a specific time zone if I want to for that particular location, or automatically set it based on my geography. You can also go in here at the site level and you can see that there's a section here called subnets, and subnets are normally they're discovered from layer 3 devices at that site. But there are times when this doesn't work. For example, if I've got a bunch of layer 3 configuration on switches that I'm not monitoring at OmniCenter, we may not be able to discover that subnet lives at that particular location. But this is the database that OmniCenter uses both for automatically trying to figure out what site a particular device lives in, as well as for generating all of those traffic reports that run by location. So when I look at my traffic reports here and it's breaking out all this traffic by site, this is all based on that subnet data. So if I go on to OmniCenter and I see I've got a lot of traffic that's falling into an undefined site, that's going to be where I have to go fix it, is at the site configuration level. I need to make sure I set up those subnets. Now, once you've got the site configured properly and you've got that location in there, the geographic map will update automatically with any new devices at that site, and it requires no further administrative configuration to update that remote site with the devices at that site. But one thing that you can do in the geographic map is you can also assign these links to specific thresholds. So if I want to go in here and edit the geographic map, I can click on any one of these links and it'll give me a list of the devices at both of the locations. And then I can pick any one of those devices, and for that device, I can pick exactly what statistic or what threshold I want to represent on that connection. So now the color of that connection is going to be represented by that particular statistic that I selected. So that bandwidth on that interface is now what's going to control the color of that line once I'm out of edit mode. So if I save that map, I can go back into my regular map view, and on my regular map view, that line will now represent that threshold. So if that threshold goes critical, that line will turn red. And you can use that kind of, as a visual aid for what's going on in your environment. Some of the other options in geographic maps, there's a whole bunch of different options for how the map itself is displayed. So just depending on, what the theme of the map you want is, there's a whole bunch of different options you can use there. You can even turn off the display of connections if you don't want to see them on the map. You don't have to use them, but it's an optional feature there. Now, strategic groups are a little bit different than other kinds of organization. As I mentioned, you can have multiple, or a device can be in multiple different strategic groups at the same time. And the reason for that is because strategic groups are typically used for things like applications. So within a particular application, I can define what devices are part of that application. We find one here that's got some stuff in it. And then for each one of those devices, I can control how important that device is to the application. So the way that strategic groups work, and you may have seen this already, if you looked at the strategic group dashboard, you'll see that there's a score associated with each of these different groups. It's got a percentage number associated with it. That percentage number is calculated through an aggregate calculation of all of the different things that we're monitoring on those systems. So it's not just host availability, it also includes performance-related thresholds. Any service checks that are critical on those systems will all go to impact that score. And the strategic group administration is how I control that. So you can set how many points a host, service, or threshold is worth. You can see what the total number of points in this particular application group is, and then kind of define what the thresholds are for what it means degraded, what is failed. The idea here is If I've got an application that's really critical, but it's only one service that really matters for that application, I could turn the scores for everything else down to 0 and only reflect the status of that service. Or I could say, if I want to make sure this thing shows failed anytime one host is down, I can change my failure threshold to be the same as a host outage. And now I know if any one of these hosts is down, that application is going to flag itself as failed. So it lets you kind of edit that. And you could do it at the default level. You can also go down into individual systems and change how their hosts' service points for each of the different services you might be monitoring on that system are actually weighted and controlled. So if I go in here, for example, to one of my let's grab one that's got some other devices in it. If I go in here, for example, to one of these devices and look at how the services are configured, you can see all the different services are enumerated separately. I can actually change it to say, well, polling status doesn't really affect this application. I'm going to make that 0 points. Same with my configuration save. That doesn't really matter. And authentication, that doesn't really matter. So I'll just turn those down to 0 and save that. And now those won't ever affect this application. Even if they go critical, the application score won't be impacted. You can also, from the group admin, you can create what we call aggregate groups. And an aggregate group is just a group of other groups that you can then use to kind of roll up your visual display. So if I want a custom dashboard for one of my executives that just shows him, here's how everything is going with your internal systems, your external systems, your critical infrastructure, I can roll those up into very high level groups and then give him his own dashboard where all he's going to see is the aggregate groups that I've created. The rule we use is that if a group, a strategic group is inside an aggregate group, you won't see it on this screen. It'll just show the aggregate group. If it's not part of an aggregate group, it'll break it out separately. When I go to configure these in a custom dashboard, you can actually pick and choose which ones are displayed. So you can have, a custom dashboard for an executive or put it up on a monitor in the executive suite that only shows them the applications that they might care about. And then everything else can be, kind of in the background hidden so that it's not popping up on the monitor and they can just know this, the stuff that is the most important to them or that you want them to be able to see.